Hello, and welcome back to the Foundation of Faith series, The Bridge Builder's Code, Volume 1, written by Jenny Jo Bingham. Today we will be reading Chapter 11, Rain and Resolve. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky stretched wide and blue, beams of sunlight warming freshly set boards. The next, clouds rolled in, thick and low. Thunder grumbled in the distance, and a wind twisted through the valley like it had something to prove. Jake had barely gotten the tarps down before the rain hit. By morning, the site looked like a battlefield. One of the newly placed crossbeams had collapsed, twisted sideways in the mud. A stack of lumber lay waterlogged and bent. Toolboxes were overturned, half buried in silt. A coil of electrical line trailed like a snapped vine into the river. The whole thing looked like it had given up mid-sentence. Jake stood ankle-deep in mud, arms crossed, and hope shrinking as he stared at the beam that had snapped clean through. It felt like a gut punch. He had followed the journal. He had prayed over every placement. He had started to believe. Now it looked like a giant hand had wiped the slate clean and laughed while doing it. "I see you're stuck in the muck," Pastor Allen said as he approached, motioning to Jake's boots that seemed to be sinking deeper by the second. Jake offered a tired half-smile. "I'm fine," he muttered. "The bridge isn't." The pastor gave a slow nod, eyes tracing the battered structure before them. "You know, when your father was building this thing, he came to me a half-dozen times wanting to quit." Jake blinked. "Really? He never told you that?" "No." Pastor Allen smiled gently. "Because he knew you looked up to him. He wanted you to see the finished part, not the fight." Jake dropped his gaze. The ache in his heart had become a familiar companion, like the weight of a tool belt you forgot you were wearing. "It feels like everything's fighting back," he said. "The weather, the town, the past." "That's how you know it matters," Pastor Allen said, his voice quiet but unwavering. Let me remind you of something I told your dad when he was worn thin and ready to give up. The work is yours, but the outcome is God's." Jake nodded slowly, the words settling deep into the soil of his soul. They didn't erase the ache, but they gave it context. Pastor Allen waited a moment longer, then placed a firm hand on Jake's shoulder. "You were never called to build this alone, and God's not waiting for you to prove yourself. He's just asking you to keep showing up." Jake's throat tightened. He nodded again, more certain this time. "I will." Pastor Allen's smile deepened as he turned to go. "Then let him meet you in the doing." And with that, he walked back toward town, cane tapping against the path, a steady rhythm in the silence Jake hadn't realized he needed, leaving him to stand on the worn boards of the half-built bridge, heart steadier than when he'd arrived. Jake stayed there long after Pastor Allen disappeared from view. The rain had stopped, but the damage remained. Mud thick at his boots, beams sagging like exhausted shoulders, and still the journal tugged at him like a compass. He pulled it from his coat pocket, hands chilled and calloused, and opened to the back pages where his own handwriting had started to mingle with his father's. One line came sharp and clear. Journal entry. "Don't measure the worth of the work by how well it holds in a storm. Measure it by whether you're still willing to rebuild when it doesn't. T.W." Jake read it again, then underlined it. Slowly, intentionally. Then he added, "Builder's Code number 2. Worth isn't proven by what lasts. It's revealed by what's worth starting over." He tucked the journal back under his arm, looked up at the battered structure before him, and whispered, "Still worth it." Then he walked back toward the workshop, one step at a time, mud and all. Jake peeled off his soaked jacket and dropped it near the door. He didn't bother changing out of the muddy jeans. He just sat, silent, motionless, at the table. The journal lay open, weighted with a wrench to keep the pages from curling. His father's handwriting stared back at him in dark blue ink, underlined 2 times. "If the storm shakes what you've built, Rebuild it with hands that remember. Jake stared at the words. They felt distant, like a foreign language. He wasn't sure what he remembered anymore, except how it felt to lose something you just started to love. He flipped the journal shut, and for the first time since returning to Silver Ridge, Jake let the doubt settle in. The door creaked open. Evan's boots scuffed across the floor. He didn't say anything at first, just set 2 steaming thermoses down on the bench with a quiet thunk. "Didn't think I'd find you in bed with sunshine and optimism," Evan said, settling onto a stool across from him. Jake gave a humorless smile. "Thought about skipping the whole building legacy thing and try opening a bait shop instead." "Smart," Evan replied. "High demand, low emotional risk, and you could really put those knot-tying skills to good use." Jake didn't laugh. Not really. Evan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I saw the beam." Jake nodded. "Looks like the storm's got better aim than we do." "It's not the storm's aim I'm worried about," Evan said. "It's yours. You still pointing in the same direction?" Jake was quiet a beat. "I thought I was. But today, I don't know." Evan tapped the thermos closest to Jake. "Then take a sip and figure it out. Storms don't mean you're off course. They just mean you're still in the game." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be inspirational?" "Nah," Evan said. "That's just something I heard Miss Dunn say under her breath while rebuking her toaster." He stood. "But I figured you could use it." Jake almost smiled. "You're a weirdly good friend, Keller." Evan shrugged. "Comes with the tool belt." Then he grabbed the spare thermos and turned for the door. "See you at the site." "Evan," he paused. "Thanks." Evan didn't look back. "Just don't make me haul that beam all by myself." And with that, he was gone. Victor Blake arrived at Rose's Cafe that morning, freshly pressed as always. His tailored blazer didn't carry a single wrinkle, and his shoes looked like they'd never touched gravel. He chose a seat at the counter, as usual, front and center, where the sugar packets and small-town sympathy were within easy reach. He stirred his coffee with too much precision, as if the ritual itself gave him authority. And when he spoke, his voice was just a notch too loud. Loud enough for the tables nearby to listen without meaning to. "A real shame about the storm," he said, shaking his head with mock gravity. "That's what happens when you start building on hope instead of permits." At table 3, Miss Marla Dunn's cinnamon roll froze halfway to her mouth. Sylvia Winston, seated in the corner with her notebook, didn't say a word, but her pen stopped moving. Victor gave the room a gracious half-smile, like he was doing them all a favor by being so composed. He leaned toward Jenny Barlow, who had paused beside him, coffee pot in hand. "You know," he said, voice smooth, "I've offered to purchase that land 3 times now. Could have turned it into something stable, predictable. A community pavilion. Maybe a welcome center. Something weatherproof." Jenny's expression didn't change. She simply nodded, tilted the pot, and accidentally spilled a generous splash of hot coffee right into Victor's lap. "Oh," she said with a tone just sort of sincere. "So sorry. These old pots get jumpy." Victor leapt to his feet with a strangled noise, napkins flying as he tried to dab his designer slacks. "This is dry clean only." Jenny said, calmly setting the pot back on the burner. "So's most of this town's patience." From across the room, Grace covered her mouth to hide a smile. Rose didn't bother. She let out a sharp snort and said, "Well, bless your heart, Victor. Looks like the coffee finally got caught up with your commentary." Red-faced and sputtering, Victor stormed out of the cafe, one hand gripping his coffee-stained thigh, the other tossing a crumpled napkin onto the counter. The bell jingled behind him as the door slammed shut. Jenny calmly reached for a towel and wiped the counter clean. "Guess some stains just don't wash out easy," she murmured, loud enough for Rose to hear. Rose chuckled and called toward the back. "If he comes back, tell him the coffee learned how to defend itself." Grace raised her coffee with a quiet smile. And to think, this town used to be boring. Jake didn't return to the site until afternoon. Not to rebuild, just to stare. He felt the weight of every nail, every undone task, every fragile piece of momentum washed away in one long night. He climbed halfway up the incline before stopping short. Voices. Laughter. Hammering? He blinked. Wait. Walt was there, sleeves rolled up, pulling warped boards from the stack like he hadn't just threatened to retire last month. The Reyes teens were making measurements and restacking usable beams. Elena shouted over the wind, "This is great field experience." Micah hauled a toolbox through the mud, earbuds out for once, calling back to Jenny, who stood at the edge with sandwiches in hand. Grace was halfway up the main support beam, clipboard wedged under one arm and a roll of duct tape in her mouth. Even Marcus was there, measuring, not talking. He hadn't called them. They had just shown up. Jake stepped forward, still stunned. "What are you all doing?" Walt didn't even look up. "What does it look like?" "Looks like we're rebuilding," Jake said quietly. Grace climbed down, boots caked with red clay. "We didn't come to build a perfect bridge, Jake. We came to build this one, with you." Evan tossed him a tarp and grabbed a shovel. "Didn't your old man write something about storms and shaky hands?" Jake blinked, then remembered the journal line. "Yeah, something like that," he said softly. He said, "If the storm shakes what you've built, rebuild it with hands that remember." "Yeah, that sounds a bit more like it," Evan laughed. "Then get to remembering, because we've got work to do." Jake arched an eyebrow. "You do realize the suspension's still in effect, right? Pretty sure paperwork says otherwise." Evan shrugged. "Paperwork doesn't swing a hammer. I've got a wrench, and Wednesday's off, remember?" Jake smirked. "Pretty sure today's Tuesday." Evan grinned. "Did I say Wednesday was my only day off?" "You're unbelievable, Keller. One of these days they'll haul us off in matching handcuffs." Evan shook his head, still grinning. "Nah, I wouldn't do that to you." He leaned back, arms crossing over his chest. "Got here early this morning. Figured I'd poke around before the crowd showed up. That's when I saw the notice posted. Suspension is officially lifted. Council must have met last night." Jake blinked, caught off guard. "And you didn't think to tell me right away?" "Oh, I thought about it, all right. Not for long. But I did think about it," Evan said, clearly pleased with himself. "But then I made one small decision, and it was out of my hands. I called Grace. I think you can imagine how it went from there. She called the others, and they all wanted to surprise you." His smirk widened. "Looks like it worked." Jake smirked faintly. "You know, Keller, you're way too proud of yourself for pulling off a conspiracy this small." Evan brushed off his hands. "Small? Please. It took coordination, timing, and nerves of steel." He started towards the worksite with a grin. "Now quit stalling and do something with that shovel before I regret letting you in on it." Jake looked at the journal, still tucked in his jacket. The page he had closed earlier, flipped open in the breeze, his father's words staring up again. This time, they didn't feel like a memory. They felt like prophecy. He pulled out a pencil, turned to the back, and began writing. Builder's Code number 3. "We rebuild not because we failed, but because we believe. Not just in blueprints, not just in beams, but in the hands holding them." That day, they worked until sundown. No speeches, no stage, just the steady rhythm of something holy taking root in the mud. And for the first time, Jake didn't feel like the builder. He felt like the bridge. The end of chapter 11. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Hope you have a great day. Bye.